Hey everyone, welcome back to the Painted Springs Garage YouTube channel. In today's video, we're doing brake pads and rotors on the front and rear of this Honda CRV. So these front brakes look pretty straightforward. Just got your brake rotor, your caliper mounting bracket, and this all comes apart with just removing these two bolts that hold the caliper to the mounting bracket. Then we'll hang this up, probably just secure it to the strut here so it's not hanging by its hose. Then we'll pull this mounting bracket off. It just has a couple bolts for it. And at that point, this brake rotor, I think, is going to basically just slip off of this hub. Maybe I'll have to give it a little tap with a hammer to get it to come off of there. But pretty straightforward. So let's get that pulled off. So these brake rotors actually have a screw that holds them to the hub, which you don't really need because the wheel holds it to the hub when you have the lug nuts on, but you can't take the brake rotor off the hub without taking the screw out. And they can be rusted in there, they can be tight, and you do not want to strip out that head or else it's going to be really tough to get off. So what I usually do is I beat on the hub with a hammer to try and break everything loose. But then usually that screw comes out pretty good, but make sure you have the proper bit. Like this is a number 3 Phillips. You want the nice fat Phillips bit so it fits in there nicely and doesn't strip it. But otherwise, they usually come off pretty easy. So another trick I sometimes use if they're in there tight is I'll gently use a impact on the bit, and that'll help loosen it while also vibrating it, and usually they'll come out easy that way. The new brake rotors come coated in some kind of an oil to keep them from corroding while they're on the shelf and, storage being shipped, etc. So once you get them out of the little plastic bag they come in, I always, first of all, just take a towel to wipe them down, wipe all that off. Then I'm going to use some brake cleaner, some brake and parts cleaner to clean all that oil off before it goes on the car. But I do that outside because it kind of stinks. Now the next thing we're going to do is service this caliper mounting bracket and of course replace the pads on it. But there's a few things I want to check before just pulling this apart and putting the new pads on. Because if there is a problem, I want to address that. But the first thing is, do the brake pads move freely in here? And both of them actually really do. So that's good. The next thing I want to see before it all comes apart is how is this all installed? So I've got a couple springs here. Those will come right out. And we've got some little guides back here, little steel pieces that will come off of here as well. And this new brake pad kit came with 4 of those. There's 2 per side. Yeah, 2 per caliper. So we got 4 of those, and we got 4 new springs. So all that stuff's going to come off of here fine. The next thing I want to look at is, do these slides move properly? Because the brake pistons only push from one side, and we depend on this whole bracket kind of moving in place on the car to pull the other side of brake pads against the rotor. So these need to move properly. And that one moves nice and freely, and this one does too. So I'm still going to take all that apart and clean it up and grease it. I'm going to take these off, clean that up, grease it, put these new plates on there. But if something was sticking or frozen, I'm going to pay extra close attention to free that up before I put it back together. In this case, we can just tear it down, clean everything, grease it up, put it back together. Alright, so everything was pretty clean, which I expected because nothing was seized or dragging, so I just got it all tidied up a little bit. Now I'm going to use my favorite grease to use on brakes, which actually is dielectric grease. It's a really light grease. I think it stays in place, it keeps things from corroding, but it doesn't get into all the other brake parts. So I'm going to put just a dab onto both of these slide pins, put them back in, put a dab on each of these points where the brake pads go, and then put the new plates on and put this back together on the car. So when I put the brake pads back in here, I want to make sure that this wear indicator is on the same side as the one that came off. So here's the brake pad that came off. They're on the same side, and it's going to be on the inside, the side with the caliper pistons on it. So that's where it needs to be. The other side just has the indicator like on the other end of the brake pad. Probably not a big deal if they're backwards, but let's put it back together how it's supposed to be. So this is ready to go back on the car. The one thing I haven't done yet is put these springs on. These springs they basically push the brake pads away from the rotor when you're not using the brakes. But since everything moves so freely, like it's secure, it's not like loose, but they move freely. If I put these springs on now, it's just going to pop those pads out of the caliper bracket. So I'm going to wait till I put this on the vehicle, put these springs in last right before the caliper goes back on. Now, before I push the brake piston calipers back in, I want to check the brake master cylinder because I don't want this to overflow when I'm pushing the pistons back in. Obviously, I'm going to move hydraulic fluid or brake fluid, from the caliper through the lines back into the master cylinder here, so the fluid level is going to come up. And right now, it's down like basically at the seam, and the max line is way up here. So there's got some room to grow. I'm going to take the lid off here so it can breathe, and also just keep an eye on this as we push the brake caliper pistons back in. So for this step, where we are just pushing these pistons back in, you can see right now they're both out a little ways. They're probably going to be almost flush with this caliper body. Pretty easy process here. I just put a brake pad back in place and grab a robust pair of channel locks. Now to get it adjusted wider here. And all that I do is put the channel locks in here and squeeze. And you could use a C-clamp or various different things to do this. All that you got to do is push these pistons back into the caliper. And I'm also feeling here for how much pressure it takes to put them back in. These ones feel pretty good. So we'll push them all the way back in. You don't need to be, you know, muscle man here to do this. It should go in pretty easy. It's not a race. Let them go nice and slow because you are pushing hydraulic brake fluid back through the system. But there we go. Now they're back in all the way. So now when I put the caliper bracket back on, get some of that dirt out of there. When I put this caliper bracket back on, I can put that caliper back on. That's all that there is to it, really. So that's really all that there is to the front brakes. It doesn't take that long. Maybe, you know, if once you got up on jacks, like maybe 30 minutes a side. So I'm going to go and do the other side real quick, and I'll meet you at the back brakes. Okay, so I'm at the rear brake now. We got the fronts back together, and the rear brake is pretty much exactly the same as the fronts, but there's a few things that are different. So we still have the brake caliper. This is a smaller one because you just don't use as much front brakes as rear. But we got the caliper to take off, then we take off this mounting bracket, and then the brake rotor comes off. I don't see a retainer on the brake drum, or on the brake rotor, but this is actually a drum-in rotor. So the parking brake is within here, and it uses drums. So hopefully that's not going to hold us up from getting this rotor off. And it has a little plug down here. Maybe that's got something to do with securing the rotor on. I guess we'll figure it out. So let's get this brake caliper and bracket off, and then we'll see about getting this rotor slash drum off and get everything cleaned up, put it back together. All right, so this brake rotor also has that screw holding it in place. So I'm going to get the hammers and you know, tap this, try to break up any corrosion, get that screw out. Then hopefully this this brake rotor slash brake drum will come off at that point. All right, so aside from having the parking brake inside the brake rotor in its own little drum, and by the way, everything here looks clean and in good shape, so I'm not even gonna mess with the drum brakes there. But yeah, this is really similar to the fronts. Unfortunately, you can't turn the rears to get access to the bolts as well. But yeah, we got a smaller brake caliper. This piston should push right straight in. If this had the parking brake built into the caliper, we'd have to use a special tool to twist it while we push it in. I've got one of those, but I don't think we need to use it today. But yeah, we'll clean up the caliper, clean up the mounting bracket I pulled off, put some new pads on here and a rotor, and easy peasy. So of course I got to clean up this caliper bracket for the rear, and this one's a little bit dirtier than the front, which or rustier, which isn't surprising because you get a lot of salt from the front tires kicked up on the rear. Now this slide here is maybe a little tight, but it's moving, but this slide is like totally seized up. So I got to get this out of here, clean it up. Hopefully it's in good condition. We can clean it and grease it up. Then we'll just pop off these brackets and clean the rest of this up, get it back together. So let's see if we can get that out. Alright, so I got the caliper cleaned up and the slides freed up. Had to take the wire wheel to the slides and figure out a little sandpaper Dremel deal to kind of clean that bore out there. But now the slide moves free, and before it did not move at all. So well worthwhile, but that did slow me down a little bit. So I'm going to put the little the metal retainers in here and get the brake pads in the caliper, put it back together. Alright, so I got the brake rotor back on here and put the screw. Oh no, I gotta put the screw back in that. Where is the screw? Oh no, I did. There it is. Put the screw back in it already. And so now I've got the caliper bracket cleaned up. And you know, one trick I found you gotta do on these is put the inner brake pad back in the brake caliper before you put it back together. So I'm gonna put this caliper bracket back on the vehicle, tighten that down, put the outer pad on it, and then I'll be able to slip the brake caliper with the inner pad on here, and we will basically be done at that point. Alright, got the brakes back together, the rear's done. They fought me a little bit with that slide pin that was stuck, but you know, we got over that. Fronts put together pretty well, those are back on already, so I'm going to throw the tire back on here and we're basically done. So they're not real complicated to do, not real difficult, but you know, you do run into things like stuck slide pins or bolts that won't come loose or pads that fight you coming out or going on. You got to make sure you clean everything up good before it goes back together. Especially if you have pads that were wearing unevenly, make sure there's nothing that's you know, rusted and sticking. But all in all, pretty straightforward job. So I hope this helped you. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.